Today, I am joined by CMC alumnus and history professor Kristopher Burrell, who comes to us from New York City, from Hostos Community College in New York City. Just really quickly, Kristopher did a PhD at CUNY Graduate Center in history and is going to tell us a little bit more about his research. He graduated in 1999 from Claremont McKenna College with a dual major in history and Black studies. And I love that you are wearing your CMS tennis shirt.
Always want to represent the Stags whenever I can.
So great. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really excited to hear more about what you do in your career in history and hear your reflections about having been a history major at CMC. So why don't we just dive right in? You were recently interviewed on the news. You were recently interviewed about the newest federal holiday, Juneteenth. So can you tell us a little bit about how your research helps us understand the creation of this new federal holiday?
Sure. I mean, I researched the modern African-American civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And of course, in studying the civil rights movement then, you're dealing with the legacies of slavery and Reconstruction. And in addition to that, I also teach, the U.S. survey from the Civil War to the present virtually every semester. And, whenever I talk about the Reconstruction era, I really make it a point to focus on the work that African Americans did themselves after the war in order to try and shape the new definitions of freedom and citizenship that were emerging and being contested. And so I think it's really important to get away from this, kind of public mythology about the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves, and to tell a much more nuanced story about, African Americans making the decisions to escape plantation life and flee towards the Union Army lines and put the Emancipation Proclamation in the context of this pressure that Black refugees or Black escapees are putting on Union generals to say, we have this issue that our current policy as a military force is not allowing us to deal with adequately. And also we are continuing to help the Confederacy by sending these people back into the Confederate lines where they were being used as manual laborers, if not executed, right, outright. And so the importance of, Juneteenth being created as a national holiday, as a federal holiday, really gives us an opportunity to really retell, re-examine the stories of the Civil War and of Reconstruction and what the legacies of those eras mean for us today in terms of a pursuit of racial equality and just a more equitable society overall.
Absolutely, yeah. I want to know more about that, but I feel like we got to kind of keep it short and sweet. So you mentioned teaching the U.S. History Survey. I think that our students would really be curious to know kind of what's a regular day in the life for you as a community college professor?
Yeah, I would definitely posit that, teaching at a community college is a little bit different in some ways from teaching at Claremont McKenna. We don't have a history major. I mean, first and foremost, that's one of, I think, the most important things to understand about our community college and a lot of community colleges, So we are teaching students who do not necessarily have any intention of becoming history majors, many of whom this will be their only exposure to U.S. history. We have a very significant immigrant population at my school in particular, as well as a lot of first generation college students. And so the courses that I tend to teach, each semester are what is generally thought of as the first half of the U.S. survey and the second half of the U.S. survey. There aren't as many opportunities to teach more specialized courses in U.S. history because of the lack of a major and the fact that we're a community college. So I did develop a survey in modern African American history about 4 or 5 years ago now, and I teach that usually once a year. But so you're trying to innovate as a professor kind of within the strictures of not being able to necessarily teach really close to your field of expertise or specialty. But as a result, I've actually gained a real fondness for the surveys as a result of having to, teach them as often as I do. And even if the material isn't always new to me, because it's new to many of the students, it makes sort of every class so dynamic. But you deal with a lot of external responsibilities as a community college faculty. Service and teaching are extremely important. And one of the things that's unique about CUNY as opposed to many community colleges is that we as faculty also do still have research requirements, and many community colleges don't. We have a teaching load that has recently gone to a 4-4, which means we teach 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring. But that's actually down from 5-4, which is what it had been prior to our most recent contract. And so with that kind of teaching load, you're spending a lot of time developing your courses, grading students, doing professional development work around teaching, and trying to find time to do scholarship can be a bit more difficult under those conditions.
Yeah, and I noticed you've published in some very good history journals, but you've also published about pedagogy, which I thought was really interesting, that your work is both historical and also just very kind of practical and applied in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's actually encouraged at the community college level more than at some other types of institutions. The scholarship of teaching and learning is actually valued quite a bit. And so, I was fortunate to contribute a chapter to a book about online learning at Hostos, and kind of my chapter was obviously a bit more historical in terms of how online learning has evolved at the college. And I've been a part of our online learning task force, or online learning assessment task force, since it was created in 2015. But I do, as much as possible, try to, publish about historical topics. I mean, I'm still working on my first book manuscript. And now that I am going to have a sabbatical for this upcoming academic year, I should finally have the time to get that completed.
That's great. You are a true teacher, scholar in that way. So I want to talk about your CMC experience a little bit, and I'd love to know more about how your majors, history and Black studies, how they shaped your career path. I mean, I think there's some kind of obvious.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I probably.
The content that you acquired, skills, right? I wonder, beyond that, as you reflect back now, 22 years since graduating, how have they shaped your career journey?
Right. Yeah, I in many ways this probably is the most direct and obvious career path that one might imagine, having those two majors. But beyond that, it also just has helped me to continue to assimilate the multiple parts of my personal identities. And it has continued to foster passion within me about, history in general, and particularly, Black history. So that love and that passion began well before coming to CMC. But the things that I learned there from the professors that I took classes from the students that I took classes with, and just from the experiences of being a student at CMC and the Claremont colleges, really, I think, gave me frameworks of learning, frameworks of analyzing information that I've certainly carried into graduate school and then into my academic career as well. I mean, things that I learned going all the way back to middle school, still are impacting the way that I teach and the way that I think today. And certainly having those two majors at CMC, I got a pretty diverse set of course experiences, which I really value.
Oh yeah, very, very interdisciplinary, I think, what you've done.
Absolutely. Yeah, Black Studies is an interdisciplinary major. And even within the history major at CMC, I, took classes in modern Germany and modern Mexico. So it wasn't all just US history all the time, which I think is really important for developing a more sort of well-rounded way of thinking about not just history, but culture and society. And I think it's one of the most important things that a history major can provide for students.
Well, that's sort of the perfect segue to my last question, which is, what advice would you give to a current CMC student? And probably most of our viewers are history majors, but maybe not, so any kind of generalized advice you have would be great.
It sounds trite perhaps, but one piece of advice would be to follow the things that you're most passionate about, and to have the faith that will sustain you in moments where it might not necessarily feel all that great, to be pursuing that. Beyond that, I would say, particularly with history and those who are history majors or who might be interested in becoming history majors, is that I think one of the most important things that history can help to both teach and develop in people is empathy. Because you are constantly learning how to see the world from another's perspective, another group, another person, another time period. And empathy is something we are sorely lacking, I think, in our broader society. And I think with people having a stronger foundational knowledge of history, that would go a long way to helping more people see the humanity in others. So, I guess if that can be boiled down to some advice, study history and study it well would be my piece of advice.
Thanks so much. I think now our enrollments will go up.
I hope so. And I hope for my classes down the road as well.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. Well, thanks so much. This has been really great. It's great to have you here, forever enshrined on our YouTube channel. And I know that our current students will look to you as a model of a potential career path and something that you can do with a history major that is both expected and unexpected, right?
And unexpected.
I mean, for CMC, not in the most typical career path, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for inviting me.